Karoline Leavitt, a poised press secretary, an overconfident liberal professor, and a grand piano. What began as a sarcastic attempt to embarrass her at Georgetown University quickly transformed into a moment that left the room in stunned silence, challenging deep-seated biases. You won't believe how Karoline Leavitt turned the tables, not through debate, but through music. Before we dive into this compelling story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our latest updates. The Georgetown University Hall shimmered under the glow of stage lights, setting the scene for the Harmony for Hope charity event, an initiative dedicated to supporting underprivileged children. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, stepped confidently onto the podium, her platinum blonde hair and assured presence making an immediate impression. At just 27, she was the youngest individual to ever hold the position, a staunch conservative from Atkinson, New Hampshire, and a dedicated supporter of Donald Trump's MAGA movement. She had just concluded a succinct speech outlining the administration's community support initiatives, her clear voice resonating through the grand hall. Then, an interruption cut through the silence. Professor Daniel Weinberg, a distinguished music lecturer at Georgetown, rose from the front row. Tall and lanky with round glasses, he carried himself with the assuredness of someone deeply entrenched in progressive ideals. With a smirk that betrayed his intent, he addressed Leavitt, his voice laced with condescension. "Can a conservative, like you play the piano, or do you simply recite MAGA slogans?" Laughter rippled through the audience, a wave of amusement spreading across the room. Weinberg folded his arms, his expression smug, clearly expecting to turn Leavitt into the subject of ridicule before an audience of hundreds. The grand piano, which had been set up for the evening's musical interlude, now became the focal point of attention. The largely liberal-leaning audience cheered, with some raising their phones, anticipating what they assumed would be a moment of public embarrassment. Karoline was momentarily surprised but remained composed. She had faced tough press briefings at the White House, stood firm against intense criticism, and now, her gaze remained steady. The laughter from the audience at Georgetown University Hall still echoed after Professor Daniel Weinberg's sarcastic challenge. Stage lights illuminated the grand piano in the right corner, a prop originally intended for the Harmony for Hope charity event's musical segment. This wasn't a typical political debate. It was a night dedicated to raising funds for underprivileged children, where guest speakers mingled with performers to engage the audience. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, had been invited to discuss the Trump administration's policies, but she was clearly not warmly welcomed by the predominantly liberal audience. The hall was packed, students in trendy hoodies, professors in neatly pressed suits, and wealthy donors occupying the front rows. The atmosphere was a mix of formality and tension, especially as Karoline stepped onto the podium. She had just finished her brief speech. "Our administration puts American kids first," her sharp voice carrying through the microphone. However, most of the audience responded with disinterest or quiet murmurs of disapproval. Some whispered, "What is MAGA doing here?" or dismissed it as more propaganda. Karoline stood her ground, her black dress fitting elegantly, a cross necklace gleaming under the lights. Her expression remained unshaken. She was used to such hostility. Professor Daniel Weinberg, the man who had just challenged her, stood among the audience, embodying academic arrogance. At 58, he was more than just a music lecturer. He was a prominent liberal at Georgetown, often teaching about music as a tool for progress. To him, art belonged to free, open minds, and he strongly believed that a staunch conservative like Karoline, an unwavering Trump and MAGA supporter, couldn't possibly have a place in it. From the moment she stepped onto the stage, with her striking platinum hair and resolute demeanor, Weinberg had already labeled her an outsider. He didn't want a direct debate. Karoline, with her White House press experience, would easily counter any argument. Instead, he chose a battleground where he believed she would fail miserably: the piano. But Karoline didn't retreat. When Weinberg called out, "Prove it if you dare," and the audience cheered. She felt a familiar pressure, one no different from facing tough press conferences or public scrutiny. Olivia Spencer, a wealthy student in the front row, sneered, "Bet she only plays cheap country tunes." Laughter erupted once again, but Karoline didn't flinch. At that moment, her mind drifted back to Atkinson, New Hampshire, where she grew up in a middle-class family. Her parents worked tirelessly, running an ice cream shop and a used truck dealership. She remembered the late nights spent in a small church nearby, teaching herself to play piano on an old, yellowed key instrument. No teacher, no formal lessons, just an outdated phone playing Chopin recordings as she taught her fingers to navigate the keys. Music wasn't just a pastime. It was how she coped with pressure, how she found herself when everything else felt overwhelming. And then she recalled her mother's calloused hands, always reassuring her, "You can do anything." Karoline thought of Trump, who had chosen her as press secretary not for her background, but for her determination. Weinberg might see her as an outsider, but she knew she didn't need his approval or anyone else's in that room. "I'll play," she decided, not for them but for herself, for the girl who once sat in that small church in Atkinson, losing herself in every note. She took her seat at the piano bench in Georgetown University Hall, the stage lights reflecting off her platinum hair. The cross necklace at her throat caught a subtle gleam in the vast space. The crowd's laughter faded into silence, but she didn't pay attention. Her focus was locked on the black and white keys of the grand piano, as if they were a doorway to something familiar. It was just her and the music. She ignored Professor Daniel Weinberg, still standing with his arms crossed, his smirk filled with doubt. Olivia Spencer's whisper, "She's going to embarrass herself," barely registered. At that moment, they didn't exist. Only the piano mattered, and she was ready to let it speak. She said nothing. There was no need. This wasn't about proving anything to Weinberg or the crowd. It was about reaffirming what she had always known. Talent didn't require permission. Taking a steady breath, she rested her hands on her lap for a brief moment before placing them on the keys. Her right hand played the first note, a soft, clear sound that rang through the hall like a drop on a still lake. The opening chords of Clair de Lune filled the air. The grand piano's tone was crisp, resonant, nothing like the dusty old church piano back home, yet the feeling was the same. Each note carried a silent story, woven from late nights in Atkinson. Karoline closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. Her right hand moved lightly across the keys, crafting gentle melodies that shimmered like moonlight. Each high note rang clear, delicate as a spark in the dark. Then, her left hand joined in, pressing deep, steady chords, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. She played slowly, giving each sound space to breathe, just as she had once done in that small church. Back then, Clair de Lune had carried her through long days of helping her parents run their ice cream shop and truck lot. Now, it carried her through this moment. Her fingers moved with precision but not mechanically. Every note was infused with emotion, each keystroke telling a silent story of resilience. As the melody rose, she leaned forward slightly, her platinum hair falling over part of her face. Her body swayed gently with the piano, moving in sync with the rhythm. Her right hand traced delicate arcs of sound, growing faster, more fluid, while her left hand grounded the melody, steady and unwavering. Each chord pressed beneath her fingertips carried weight, not just as music, but as a declaration. The faint warmth of friction lingered on her fingertips as they glided over the high notes, while the piano's deep vibrations rippled through her hands, as if it were alive in this moment with her. The climax arrived. Her eyes opened, catching the gleam of the stage lights, but her hands never faltered. They danced across the keys, weaving sharp, high notes with bold, resonant chords, forming a current that surged like ocean waves. She poured everything into the music, transforming years of self-taught practice in that small Atkinson church into fluid, effortless melodies. Her right hand struck the climax's final notes with confidence, while her left softened, drawing out long, low tones like the rhythm of her own steady breath, unshaken, unwavering. She pictured those nights in Atkinson when music had been her only solace, and now it was her strength, not a weapon to attack, but a means to stand firm. The final note rang out, pressed gently, soft yet powerful, like moonlight fading into the shadows. She held her hands on the keys for a moment, breathing evenly, then lifted her gaze. A sharp, unwavering look swept across the hall. A single, hesitant clap broke the silence, then another, until the sound grew into something more. But Karoline didn't care. She knew she had done something beyond the music itself. The applause was not just approval. It was a wave of disbelief and reluctant admiration from those who had doubted her, now forced to accept an undeniable truth. But Weinberg didn't clap. He stood motionless, arms still crossed, his expression frozen in place. The glint of smugness in his round glasses had vanished, replaced by something hollow. He had lost, and he knew it. In his mind, the outcome had been certain. Karoline would either fumble through an embarrassing performance or refuse to play at all, leaving him victorious with a smug remark to seal her humiliation. He had pictured the crowd laughing, his own triumphant smirk, the moment proving that a conservative like her had no place in the artistic world he cherished. But reality had flipped against him. She hadn't just played, she had played with undeniable talent, with an emotional depth he never expected. Her music wasn't just impressive, it shattered his belief that art belonged only to the open-minded, the progressive, the liberal. It exposed the flaw in his assumption that someone like Karoline, with her rigid political views, couldn't possibly possess artistic grace. His throat felt dry, his hands trembled slightly, though he kept them tightly crossed. He glanced at Olivia Spencer, searching for some reassurance from the student who had eagerly backed his challenge. But Olivia didn't meet his gaze. She sat frozen, fingers gripping the edge of her chair, her expression blank, like she had just lost something she had once been certain of. Weinberg swallowed, struggling to regain composure, yet his own silence weighed heavier than the applause around him. He had tried to corner her, to push her into failure. But now she hadn't just escaped. She had completely turned the tables. She had turned the tables, making him the fool, in front of hundreds of students, faculty, and donors, people he had once confidently lectured about the value of art. Karoline rose from the bench, each step steady and composed, as if she were facing a White House press briefing. She moved toward center stage, turning directly to Weinberg, her gaze locked onto him without hesitation. The applause gradually faded as the audience sensed the weight of the moment, a silent but undeniable confrontation. Weinberg inhaled deeply, forcing himself to regain control. He uncrossed his arms, stepped forward, and spoke, his voice breaking the tense silence. "I didn't think you could do it." It wasn't praise. It was reluctant acknowledgement, tinged with the last remnants of his wounded pride. He was still trying to salvage some dignity, though everyone could see it had already crumbled. But Karoline didn't offer him an easy way out. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of gratitude or relief. It was the assured smile of someone who knew she had won completely and undeniably. "Talent doesn't need a liberal or conservative label, Professor," she said, her voice sharp yet controlled, carrying through the quiet hall. "You don't define me or anyone else." Her words struck like a blade, cutting through the very belief system Weinberg had upheld for years. The notion that art belongs solely to progressive minds, that someone like Karoline had no place in his world. The audience remained frozen, some offering hesitant claps, but most staying silent, absorbing the gravity of what had just been said. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a declaration. Weinberg parted his lips to respond, but no words came. His face grew warm, not with anger, but with the sting of embarrassment, a rare sensation in his long career at Georgetown. He had been wrong, not just about Karoline, but about the rigid ideas he had built his reputation on. She hadn't just played. She had played with soul, with passion, with something he couldn't dismiss. Avoiding her gaze, he turned his eyes downward, trying to maintain composure, but his hands trembled slightly, a subtle crack in his demeanor that didn't go unnoticed by those nearby. He had intended to make her a joke, to expose her as an imposter in the artistic world he claimed as his own. Instead, he was the one left speechless, not by choice but because there was nothing left to say. Karoline didn't stop there. She stepped even closer, her voice unwavering, each word carrying undeniable weight. You think art belongs to someone, but it doesn't. It's for anyone who dares to take it. And I just did. Her statement wasn't just for Weinberg. It was for the entire crowd that had laughed at her, dismissed her, and believed she didn't belong. Applause erupted again, stronger this time, not necessarily from those who agreed with her politics, but from those who could no longer deny the talent and conviction she had displayed. Weinberg turned away, retreating to his seat in silence. He lowered himself onto the chair, his hands resting stiffly on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor as if trying to avoid the reality of what had just unfolded. A reality where Karoline had not just defied his expectations, she had shattered them. Karoline remained standing, watching him until he was fully seated. She didn't need his approval. She had already proven everything she needed to. She never had. Karoline turned to the crowd, the stage lights casting her as a warrior fresh from battle. The applause surged through the hall like a rising wave as she stood at center stage, her platinum hair blazing under the lights like a silent emblem of victory. Professor Daniel Weinberg sat motionless in his row, his stare blank, hands trembling, faintly on his knees. Moments ago, she had delivered her sharpest retort. Talent doesn't need a liberal or conservative label, Professor. You don't define me or anyone. Her words didn't just silence him. They resonated in the minds of the audience. Those who had once mocked her now faced an undeniable truth. She hadn't just played the piano. She had performed with a skill and passion that soared beyond every prejudice they had held. But the crowd's reaction wasn't uniform. A group of liberal students who had cheered when Weinberg challenged her now sat in stunned silence, their hands motionless, eyes flickering between confusion and reluctant admiration. A short-haired girl with glasses leaned toward her friend, whispering, "I didn't expect her to play that well." Her friend nodded but said nothing, still processing what had just happened. In another corner of the hall, neutral attendees, those who had come for the love of music, for harmony, for hope rather than politics, clapped heartily, their eyes shining with admiration. "She's really good," a middle-aged man murmured to his wife, his voice tinged with surprise. The applause wasn't just praise, it was recognition. Even those who struggled to accept it couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. But in the front row, Olivia Spencer was a different story. Her fingers gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her face, usually radiant with the confidence of a major donor's daughter, was now stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line as if holding back a storm of emotions. Anger, shame, disbelief. Earlier, she had led the crowd in mocking Karoline, sneering that she only plays cheap country tunes, confident she was about to witness a public disaster. But now that smug certainty is gone. Karoline hadn't just played. She had performed with a depth Olivia couldn't comprehend, an intensity that shattered the illusion she had clung to, the illusion that she and her like-minded peers embodied. True refinement, while Karoline was nothing more than an outsider, unworthy of the artistry they claimed as their own. Olivia turned toward the friend beside her, a red-haired girl who had laughed loudly at her earlier jab. "It's just a cheap stunt," Olivia whispered, her voice tight, still clinging to scorn. "She's overreacting to win the crowd, right?" But her friend didn't answer right away. Her eyes remained fixed on Karoline. Then slowly she shook her head. "No, Olivia. She's actually good." She spoke softly, just loud enough for Olivia to hear. The words hit Olivia's pride like a punch. She turned away, staring at the floor, her nails digging deeper into the armrest as if trying to vent her frustration on something lifeless. Olivia couldn't accept it. Karoline, the crude MAGA figure she had dismissed, had just left the entire hall stunned. Meanwhile, Olivia, with all her pride, now had nothing left to say. On stage, Karoline stood still, unmoved by the applause or the crowd's gazes. She didn't need their approval. She never had. She turned her head slightly, glancing at Weinberg, who sat with his head bowed in a distant row, then out at the audience. A figure stepped from the wings, Professor Margaret Hayes, the event organizer. Politically neutral and known for her fairness, she approached Karoline, a warm smile on her lips. "Leavitt, you just did something no one expected tonight," she said, her voice carrying through the mic and sparking even louder applause. "I didn't know you had this talent. Truly impressive." Hayes's praise was like an official stamp, acknowledging what the crowd couldn't deny. Though some remained reluctant, there was no refuting it now. But to Olivia, that praise was fuel on the fire. She shot to her feet, unable to hold back. "What's the big deal?" she shouted, her shrill voice cutting through the applause. The crowd froze, turning to her. "She just played a song. It doesn't change who she is." A few nodded in agreement, still clinging to their prejudice. But most remained silent, their eyes shifting from Olivia to Karoline, waiting. Olivia stood there, face flushed, hands trembling slightly as if she had just challenged the whole room to reclaim some lost dignity. Karoline didn't reply immediately. She simply looked at Olivia, her gaze calm but piercing as if to say, "You don't need to shout for me to hear you." Professor Hayes raised a hand to quiet the murmurs in the crowd, then turned to Karoline, offering the mic. "Do you want to say anything?" she asked. Karoline took the mic, breathed lightly, then spoke. "I'm not here to change anyone's mind." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "I played because I can, and because no one gets to say I can't." Simple words, but powerful. They echoed through the hall like a final affirmation. The applause erupted again, louder than before. Even some who had doubted her, who disagreed with her politics, couldn't deny the strength in every note she had played. The final applause in the hall died down. Karoline Leavitt still stood center stage, the lights shining down on her like an unspoken victory. Professor Daniel Weinberg remained seated, his head bowed in silence. Olivia Spencer stormed out of the front row, her face dark with frustration. But the story didn't end there. In the crowd, dozens of phones had been raised high from the moment she played Claire de Lune. Through her defiant retorts to Weinberg and her effortless silencing of Olivia. And now, they came into play. Students, guests, and neutrals didn't wait. Within minutes, videos of Karoline's performance were flooding social media. On TikTok and X, the clip of her piano recital paired with her sharp declaration, "Talent doesn't need a liberal or conservative label," spread like wildfire in a stiff breeze. On TikTok, the first video, posted by a Georgetown student, carried the caption, "White House press sec, just silence the room, watch this." The caption alone was enough to grab attention. As Claire de Lune played in the background, Karoline's platinum hair glided over the keys, her hands moving effortlessly. The video held viewers' eyes captive. Within an hour, it had over 1 million views. The comments flooded in, "She's gorgeous and talented." "I don't like Trump, but she's amazing." Some users added moonlight effects and artistic filters, turning the clip into a Gen Z trend, a fitting evolution for the woman who had once brought White House press briefings to TikTok. Then came another version, this one splicing her exchange with Professor Weinberg. The hashtag #CarolinePlays gained momentum, elevating the story beyond a viral video into a cultural moment. But X, formerly Twitter, reacted differently. A conservative account reposted the clip with the caption, "Karoline Leavitt just taught Georgetown liberals a lesson. MAGA isn't just strong, it's deep." The tweet exploded with thousands of retweets, catching the eyes of high-profile conservative voices. Then, Donald Trump himself chimed in. "Karoline is an incredible talent. She makes me proud. The country's talking about her." His post fanned the flames. Within hours, the video had reached millions of views, turning Karoline into a MAGA icon overnight. Conservatives hailed her as a cultural warrior, flooding X with memes and quotes. She played piano and crushed the bias. Who dares say MAGA has no culture now? Trump's endorsement only cemented her as a rising star beyond her press secretary role. But not everyone was celebrating. Olivia Spencer and her liberal peers weren't staying silent. From her phone, Olivia fired off a response. Don't be fooled. Karoline Leavitt is just grandstanding to boost her name. Playing piano doesn't change her backward conservatism. The post gained a few hundred likes from her circle, but the pushback was immediate. One user replied, "Jealous, you can't do that." Another, "She's that good and you call it a stunt, give it up." The social media war erupted instantly, mirroring America's deep divide. Some saw Karoline's talent as transcending politics. Others tried to downplay her skill to protect their ideological stance. Even on TikTok, not all reactions were positive. Liberal creators responded with mocking videos. One overlaid her playing with a taunting voice. "When your MAGA mom tries to act artsy but stays MAGA." The clip gained tens of thousands of views, but it couldn't outshine the original's pull. Then came the neutral voices. A popular TikTok user known for staying out of political debates commented, "I don't care about politics, but she's unreal on piano. Don't hate talent over opinions." That single comment got tens of thousands of likes, proving that Karoline's video wasn't just a political battleground, it was an emotional moment that resonated across ideological lines. The spread didn't stop there. International accounts picked it up. From London to Sydney, X accounts shared it with captions like, "US press sec just silenced a room. Watch." A London newspaper ran the headline, "Karoline Leavitt, from White House to piano, a global surprise." The video was now being subtitled in multiple languages. She was no longer just a political figure. She was a worldwide phenomenon. Back at Georgetown, some audience members left the hall, still glued to their phones, replaying the clip, whispering to themselves, "What did we just witness?" Someone murmured, "Did she really just do that?" Another whispered anxiously, "I don't like MAGA, but I can't deny she's good." Olivia Spencer and her friends tried once more to counter the wave, posting, "Don't let MAGA fool you. She's no artist, just an opportunist." But her effort drowned quickly in a flood of pro-Karoline comments. One user replied, "She played better than your so-called artists." Another added, "Opportunist or not, talent is real. What about you?" Olivia shut off her phone, her face dark with frustration, knowing she couldn't reverse the tide. Karoline's video hadn't just spread, it had become a phenomenon, a tale of talent overcoming prejudice. And Olivia, with all her arrogance, was now just a faint shadow in Karoline's glow. The hall slowly quieted as the last applause faded, stage lights still shining on Karoline Leavitt, who stood at the center with unshaken confidence. Professor Daniel Weinberg had bowed his head in silence. Olivia Spencer had left the front row with a darkened expression, and the crowd dispersed, carrying hushed whispers and glowing phone screens as the video continued spreading across TikTok, and ex-Karoline didn't move right away. She stood there for a moment, sweeping her gaze across the audience as if memorizing this moment. The moment she had turned a challenge into victory, not with words, but with music. Then, she turned and stepped down the small stairs off the stage, her black heels clicking lightly against the polished wood floor, each step a silent testament to her strength. A young aide in a white shirt rushed toward her from the wings, breathless with excitement. "Leavitt, your video is going viral everywhere," he whispered, his eyes wide as if he had just witnessed a miracle. "TikTok, X, the whole country is watching. Even President Trump tweeted about you." Karoline nodded slightly, unsurprised. She was used to the spotlight, from tense White House briefings facing sharp liberal press questions to being dubbed the MAGA princess online. But this was different. The attention wasn't coming from political debates or her role as press secretary. It was coming from Claire de Lune, from a talent she had kept quiet for years, now bursting before millions. She left the hall through a side exit, Washington, D.C.'s city lights replacing the stage glow, reflecting off her platinum hair as she stepped outside. The night air was cool, but she didn't feel it. Inside, she felt a warmth, not from TikToks, millions of views, or Trump's tweet, but from breaking a barrier no one had expected. She thought of Weinberg, the arrogant professor who had wanted to make her a laughingstock, now silent in his own defeat. She thought of Olivia, who had mocked her, now leaving in disarray. But above all, she thought of herself, the girl from Atkinson, New Hampshire, self-taught on a church piano, now standing here. Not just a press secretary, but someone who had made the world take notice of her talent. Karoline paused at the curb, watching the cars pass under the streetlights. She didn't rush to her car. She wanted to savor this just a bit longer. The video might be spreading, millions might be talking, but for her, fame wasn't the point. This was personal. Triumph over doubting looks, mocking words, and the prejudices she had faced since stepping into politics. She recalled her early days in the White House, an unknown side under Kayleigh McEnany, working in the correspondence office before rising to national press secretary for Trump's 2024 campaign. She remembered running for Congress in New Hampshire, losing to Chris Pappas but earning Trump's praise as high energy. The journey wasn't easy, but every step proved that background or political labels couldn't limit her. And today, music had done it again. She unlocked her phone, scrolling through TikTok comments. "So dope," one user wrote. "MAGA's got talent for real," another added. Someone else half joked, "Classical pianist and press secretary? What's next? Concert tours?" Karoline didn't reply. She didn't need to. She let her music and actions speak for her. A message popped up from Nicholas. "Just saw the video. You're incredible. Nico loves it too." She chuckled softly, picturing her months-old son clapping in his own way. She texted back, "Thanks, home soon." A reminder that despite the world watching, family was her anchor, the quiet strength that kept her going. Karoline walked toward the waiting black car, the driver already holding the door open. Before stepping in, she glanced back at the Georgetown building, light spilling from its windows. She knew this wasn't over. The video would spread further, and by tomorrow she'd be facing a barrage of press questions, piano to politics, talent to ideology. But she wasn't worried. She was ready, as always. She slid into the car, the door closing behind her as it rolled through Washington's illuminated streets. Leaning back, she closed her eyes briefly, letting Claire de Lune play in her mind, not from the viral video, but from her own memory. From those self-taught days on an old church piano in Atkinson, New Hampshire, to now. Leaving the stage wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she wasn't just a press secretary. She was someone who had proven that talent and will could outshine any label others tried to place on her. The black car pulled to a stop at the White House gates, stark white light streaming from the windows, reflecting off her platinum hair as she stepped out. It was late, but she didn't go straight home. She wanted her office, the space where she prepped for the grueling press briefings that had become her battlefield. Her black heels clicked softly against the long marble hallway, each step a steady rhythm, reminding her of the journey, from an unknown girl in Atkinson to the youngest press secretary in U.S. history. Tonight, at Georgetown University, she had turned Professor Daniel Weinberg's challenge into victory, with nothing but Claire de Lune, and for the first time in a long while she felt a rare calm. Not from the video sweeping across TikTok and X, not from the headlines that would come, but from proving what she had always believed. Talent and will trumped any political label. She pushed open the office door, soft light spilling onto a desk, cluttered with papers and a still glowing computer screen. Karoline sank into the leather chair, leaning back slightly, closing her eyes to absorb the afterglow of the night. The scene at Georgetown replayed vividly in her mind. Weinberg's arrogant stare as he challenged her to play, Olivia Spencer's mocking laughter as she approached the piano, and then the absolute silence when she finished. The video might be going viral. Millions might be buzzing about it. But for her, That moment wasn't just about music. It was about standing up to doubters, as she had done so many times before, and forcing them to rethink their assumptions. She turned on the computer, the screen lighting up with a flood of notifications, emails from the communications team, messages from colleagues, reports on social media reactions. She skimmed a few tweets. Trump called her an incredible talent. Conservatives hailed her as a MAGA hero. Liberals still sniped with comments like, just a stunt. She didn't linger. She was used to this divide. Ever since she entered the White House, first as an aide under Kayleigh McEnany in the Correspondence Office, then as National Press Secretary for Trump's 2024 campaign, she had been both praised and criticized. The Georgetown event didn't change that. It only made things clearer. She didn't need anyone's approval to prove her worth. She thought of Atkinson, the small New Hampshire town where she grew up in a middle-class family. Her parents worked hard, one running an ice cream shop, the other managing a used truck dealership to raise 3 kids. No one there could have imagined she'd be here. A girl who had taught herself piano in a small church, its keys yellowed and creaky, with only an old phone playing Chopin and Beethoven recordings for company. But those days had shaped her. No teachers, no resources, just willpower and the belief that she could do anything if she tried. She remembered running for Congress in 2022, losing to Chris Pappas, but still earning Trump's praise as high energy and brilliant. That trust, paired with her own relentless drive, had brought her here. At just 27, she stood at the center of power, not just as Trump's press secretary, but as someone who had carved her own path. Georgetown wasn't the first time she had faced doubt. She recalled tense press briefings, sparring with CNN's Karoline Collins defending Trump against piercing questions with unflinching resolve. She had been labeled an opportunist, a MAGA princess, but each time she stood firm, turning pressure into strength. Tonight, the piano was another way to do that. No debates, no explanations, just music, and it had silenced them. Weinberg had wanted to humiliate her. Olivia had wanted to belittle her. They had both failed. And now, the viral video was undeniable proof. She had outdone them. Not just at Georgetown, but before the entire world. Tomorrow will be hectic. The press would ask about Georgetown, about the piano, about Trump. She would face it all, just as she always had. But she wasn't worried. She was ready. Just as she had been since those early days in Atkinson, teaching herself piano in that small church. Just as she had been the day she first stepped into the White House as an unknown aide. She thought of Claire de Lune, not just as a hobby, but as a symbol of her resilience. A reminder that talent didn't need a political label or anyone's permission. It only needed to exist to be seen. Turning back to the desk, she picked up a pen and jotted down a few lines in her notebook. Ideas for tomorrow's briefing. She wouldn't dodge the Georgetown questions. She'd confront them, just as she had confronted Weinberg, Olivia, and every challenge life had thrown at her. Karoline smiled, a subtle but confident grin. It was late, but she was still here, surrounded by stacks of papers and a computer screen, glowing with alerts. After leaving the Georgetown stage where she played Claire de Lune to silence Professor Daniel Weinberg and rattle Olivia Spencer, she carried a certain satisfaction. Not from the video spreading across TikTok and X, but from reaffirming her strength to the world. But she didn't linger in the moment. She turned back to her notebook, her pen moving quickly across the page. Georgetown, piano, talent needs no label. She had no plans to sidestep the media. She had been at the podium long enough to predict their questions, the surprise performance, Weinberg's reaction, and of course any connection to Trump's politics. She smirked faintly, recalling past clashes with CNN's Karoline Collins, defending Trump with unyielding grit. Tomorrow would be no different. She would step up to the podium, look straight into the cameras, and answer with the same confidence that took her from an unknown aide to the youngest press secretary in history. Georgetown was just another test, and she was ready. Karoline stepped out of her White House office, the hallway lights dimming behind. her as she made her way toward the exit. Her black heels tapped softly on the marble floor, a steady rhythm echoing through the quiet corridors. It was late, but her mind was still sharp, replaying the night at Georgetown University, where she played Claire de Lune and turned a mocking challenge into a resounding victory. The video was still spreading, millions now seeing her as more than just the White House press secretary. She had proven herself, not through politics or rhetoric, but through undeniable talent. But as she stood at the White House gates, gazing at Washington, D.C.'s twinkling skyline, she wasn't thinking about fame or praise. She was thinking about the journey, from Atkinson, New Hampshire, to here. From a small-town girl to a national figure. From a child who taught herself piano on a dusty old church keyboard with yellowed, creaking keys, to the woman who played Claire de Lune before the world and left them speechless. She took a deep breath of the cold night air. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, more questions, more scrutiny, but she had faced it all before, and she was ready. She had found something of her own. No teachers, no formal lessons, just an old phone with Chopin and Beethoven recordings. She didn't learn piano to impress anyone, but to find solace, to push past the weariness of long days and uncertain nights. Those late hours at the keys shaped her will, a will that needed no guide, only faith that she could do anything if she tried. That journey didn't end in Atkinson. It took her to the White House, from an unknown aide in the correspondence office, under Kayleigh McEnany to National Press Secretary for Trump's 2024 campaign, and now the youngest press secretary in history at just 27. She remembered running for Congress in New Hampshire, losing to Chris Pappas but earning Trump's praise. As high energy, she recalled tense briefings, standing firm against CNN's Caitlin Collins, defending Trump with unrelenting grit. At every step, she faced doubt. Some called her a MAGA princess, others an opportunist. But she never bowed. Georgetown was just another chapter, another moment where she turned doubt into triumph. She didn't need permission to play Claire de Lune. She didn't need a conservative or liberal label for her talent to shine. When Weinberg tried to shame her, when Olivia tried to diminish her, they failed. Because she didn't fight back with words. She let the music speak for itself. It was a lesson she had learned in Atkinson, in the quiet solitude of a church piano, in the relentless pressure of White House press briefings. And it was the lesson she wanted others to remember. You don't need anyone to define you. You only need the courage to seize a chance and make it yours. Her story wasn't just about music. It wasn't just about politics. It was about resilience, from Atkinson to Georgetown, from an old piano to a grand stage. She proved that talent. And willpower could break through any label. And so can you. Have you ever been doubted, mocked, told you don't belong? Have you ever felt trapped by a label, your job, your background, your beliefs? Karoline had been there. When Weinberg challenged her, when Olivia laughed at her, she could have shrunk back. But she didn't. She played Claire de Lune and left them speechless. Her story reflected something much deeper, the polarization and prejudice of today's America. A Georgetown professor had challenged her because she was a conservative, assuming she lacked artistic depth, a common bias in a country where people are too often judged by labels rather than ability. Olivia Spencer, with the privilege of the elite, mocked her with, "She only knows the country," a reminder of how Americans still dismiss one another based on class, region, and ideology. And when the video spread across TikTok and X, the reactions told the same story. Conservatives hailed her as a MAGA hero. Liberals dismissed it as just a stunt. The same divide, the same battle lines drawn in digital America. But the lesson wasn't in the debate. It was in the moment she turned prejudice into power. Weinberg and Olivia tried to shame her. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She played, a skill self-taught on a creaky, yellowed piano in a small New Hampshire church, a talent that spoke louder than any political label ever could. And that is the lesson for anyone listening today. Don't let society define you. Don't let a party, a background, or a belief system tell you what you are capable of. Take inspiration from Karoline. Stand before the world, before the doubters, the critics, the ones who say you can't, and let your actions, not your words, prove them wrong. Find your own clair de lune, your talent, your passion, your grit, and let it break every barrier in your way. Thanks for following Karoline Leavitt's journey from Atkinson to Georgetown. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and talent overcoming prejudice. See you in the next video, where we keep exploring the people who dare to stand up and make the world take notice.